Welcome everyone. I don't know how many people are joining or not, but I think we're gonna have to give it a couple of minutes, probably for everybody to come on board. So let's just see and get maybe an okay from our guys over here. But we'll give it like maybe 30 seconds to maybe a minute, and then we'll start off with a round of intros, so that everybody who's just joining can actually start with us at the same time. Is that okay?
Sounds great.
Yeah, makes sense.
Nice.
Maybe if we've got, I don't know, 30 seconds, couple minutes. Vedran, do you want to talk a little bit about Treblle and what you're doing here today? And
this shouldn't be a sales call, but yeah. I mean,
we got time.
Yeah, one of the things that we like to say that we do is Treblle is an end-to-end API ops platform. So essentially what we like to do is we like to operationally help you at every stage of the API lifecycle. That means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, right? But essentially we've got 6 core products: API observability, governance, documentation, analytics, security, and our AI assistant. And we kind of, it started off as a developer tool that I built for myself, and we've been growing it ever since. And we're trying to kind of solve and rectify many of the problems that people kind of face when they're doing APIs and when they're trying to work with APIs. And I think we're going to talk about most of these problems on this call today.
Fantastic.
Awesome. Thank you.
Let's see. I think, let me just get the go ahead and we can actually get started. Let's just, I'm watching at one of our guys here in a room and just waiting for the thumbs up to get it. And that's about it.
Great.
Okay, he says we're good. We're good. So again, welcome everyone. Really happy to have you all here. And one of the things that we're gonna do is essentially do a round of intros. So we're gonna be talking a lot about APIs and a lot of the things, what to do on APIs, what not to do, and more importantly, where the future of APIs is. And I think we have the perfect kind of quorum here, if you will, a perfect set of candidates to tell us more about that. So we can actually start with Claire. I'd be more than happy if you could kind of give us an intro from your end, who you are, what you do, and how did you end up in the API space?
So thank you, Vedran, and to the Treblle team for having us. It's great to be here. So my name is Claire Barrett. I'm a director of APIsFirst. I'm also co-founder of the API Collective, and I co-lead a global Women in APIs community. So I got involved in APIs specifically when I moved back to the UK from having been in Australia for most of my adult professional career. That was at the end of 2019, just coincided really with the start of the world changing. And but prior to that, I had been consulting and being consulted to in generally large, complex, incumbent organizations, enterprises on bringing their strategies to life. And APIs have been part of that technology strategy journey for many for some time. And that's where I specialize, helping people bring those strategies.
Thank you. I really look forward to hearing and getting all of those insights. We can maybe jump to Bill, and then we'll finish it off with Matthew and maybe a short intro with me. I think, Bill, everybody kind of knows you in the API scene from Nordic APIs, but feel free to kind of give an intro about yourself.
Yeah, sure thing. Thanks for having us all. For those of you who don't know, I'm Bill Doerrfeld. I am the editor of a blog called Nordic APIs, and we kind of cover like the design, strategy, security aspects of what it means to be an API provider. So we do a lot of content around APIs, and so I've kind of been following this space from like a journalistic viewpoint since about 2013. Outside of Nordic APIs, managing that presence, I also am a tech journalist. I submit to a handful of other publications as well.
Nice. Thanks, and thanks for all the content you're pushing out and following, I guess, the API space. And I think also a legend here, Matthew, if you would please give us an intro about yourself and some of the recent things that you've been doing around APIs.
Sure. I don't know about legend, but I'll take it anyway. Flattery gets you everywhere. As was mentioned, my name is Matthew Reinbold. I'm a senior API consultant with about 25 years of tech experience. I help companies from Fortune 500s to startups define their product platform strategies, their software governance strategies. And I also write a little thing called Net API Notes that gets passed around every so often. Not quite the size of Nordic APIs, but knock on wood, big dreams.
Nice.
I'm still a follower, regardless.
Nice. And I know I've kind of taken some part to intro Treblle, but just briefly about me. My name is Vedran. I'm the CEO and founder of Treblle, and Treblle is an end-to-end API ops platform. So we help you operationally deal with a lot of things that you do on your APIs as a company, as a team, as a business. And I've been in the tech space for, probably like more than 15 years. I've built more than 100 APIs. And I've been doing that for the past 10 years. And recently I've been on a journey of kind of building Treblle and kind of helping shape some of the tooling around that. And the reason why we all are here actually is Matthew here kind of published a series of articles called APIFutures, which essentially I was very interested in. And I'm always happy to see people who want to talk about APIs openly, who want to help us understand, who want to help push the kind of space forward. So if you wouldn't mind saying a couple of words about how you got to the idea, what the idea is, and a bit more about APIFutures.
Sure. So I recently posted a very lengthy breakdown of the motivation and the methodology behind APIFutures to Net API Notes. If you want 2,000 words on that, you certainly are welcome to wander over there after this talk. But the short version is I was seeing so many people that I thought were insightful or very articulate talking about APIs, and especially starting up new API newsletters or YouTube channels or podcasts. And to me, the amount of attention they were getting just wasn't proportional to the expertise that they were sharing. And so I wanted to try and create something to help put a spotlight on these individuals and get them noticed by the larger API community. At the same time, I was being very pragmatic because that time of year, January, there's not a lot going on in the tech press. I have editorial needs that I need to do. And so it was a very practical need of let's take this void of information and this kind of quiet time, and let's raise a ruckus. If I a lone voice highlight some of these people, I might only have this much impact. But if I can gather a group together and we're all talking about this thing, our voices together are so much larger, so much louder, and will get noticed. And hopefully audiences will respond to that, and maybe they'll find their next new favorite person that they follow or learn from.
Yeah, maybe we turn this into an all-in podcast but just for APIs or something like that. But thank you. Like I said, a great collection of articles about APIs, the API industry, tooling, and everything in between, I guess, there. So I think we're going to talk a lot about the future of APIs today and like what it means for businesses, what it means for companies, what should people expect. But maybe taking a step back, if we could just quickly reflect on what has been happening for the past, I would say, couple of years, especially in the API space, and how have we evolved from basically people not even talking about APIs, not even discussing that, to all of a sudden people getting interested into APIs, businesses getting interested. And I think I've talked to we've talked a bit before the show, and I think Claire has also some insights there, which I like. So what do you think is happening or has been happening in the API space so far?
So from a, I guess, incumbent industry, large enterprise perspective, it's probably a little bit like asking what the weather's like in the northern hemisphere. You know, it's sunshine and happy days, and you know, in some places tsunamis, in others deserts, in others. So
Right.
there isn't, you can't really kind of say where some organizations are at or not, but there are typically all large organizations now have some center of gravity around APIs, a competency of some sort. Typically, many of them went through a very decentralized model initially, you know, incubating ideas at lots of different levels, and then they needed to get their arms around it, probably realized they'd then kind of maybe over controlled in order to get their arms around it, and then they moved through models of federation. Increasingly now it's about how to free up all the sort of bottlenecks that inverted commas centralized capabilities provide, but of course still maintaining in heavily regulated industries, in industries with a high responsibility for personal data and all of those sorts of things, balancing out that kind of control versus autonomy that teams need to be able to pull things together. I think the other thing I'd say is that APIs have been at the heart, if not front and center, of the labels that people use. Digital transformation is typical label, but the ability to, you know, modularize and simplify their tech landscapes, get change happening, IT change happening faster, bringing more stuff in-house often. APIs are all at the center of that, which is why I like helping people with that kind of change. And I think everybody's somewhere on that journey. Those that got onto it earlier are certainly seeing huge advantage. That's unquestionable, and that's now very widely, I think, documented and sold at a kind of strategic level.
I couldn't agree more. One of the things that we've noticed is kind of data is being less siloed, and I think, or people want to share more data. I guess we as a civilization are kind of more inclined to share not just the personal stuff on Facebook, but actually business data and something that can actually create even more business or more monetary value. And I feel like APIs are a perfect match there. So, Bill, you've been writing about APIs for a very long kind of time. What do you feel like? What do you see recently? Has there been more activity, more increase in the popularity of APIs and people wanting to access APIs and build them?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, ever since I started writing about this, there's been a slow trajectory in terms of the number of APIs being developed. I think in more later years, these interfaces have been seen as less of toys or just an offshoot of some existing platform. It's not so much like that anymore. It's not just like a hobbyist project or part of some mashup that a developer is doing on the side. It feels more like this is more like a lingua franca for digital businesses and how they connect. And I think like what Claire alluded to, and the whole idea of the composable enterprise and all the microservices architectures that have been developed lately, APIs are core to that. Lately, I've seen a renewed interest in productization and monetization too. So it's not just internal, private, or partner strategies. There's a lot happening with public-facing software as a service, and how that is being deployed often is through an API. So we're seeing a lot of new APIs being developed across the board. I think the pandemic sparked a lot of digital transformation too, which naturally led to more of these interfaces being developed. Yeah.
I can agree. I think we've touched upon it a bit, but essentially, I personally, and talking to customers, talking to people who are in the industry, I've personally seen an uptick of basically people who are interested in the API space, want to join the API space, and of course want to contribute there in a meaningful way, especially like you said, since pandemic or 2018 and onwards as well. Matthew, you've been living APIs for a very long time. Do you think this is just something that is happening? Is this a fad, or are APIs here to stay, and they're popular? They're getting more and more popular for good reasons.
It's certainly not a fad. There was a moment probably around 2016, 2017, where I was looking at the technology landscape and trying to decide if I needed to find the next thing. And after doing a quick survey and some careful analysis, it was like, well, no, wait a minute. So many of these follow on transformations, from cloud to voice assistants to whatever it may be, at their heart have APIs. I think, to your original point, what has been happening over the last decade is APIs have gone from exhaust, or something thought of after the fact of natural development, to a central leading role. And as part of that, as Claire covered in her piece and some of the other API folks have spoken to, that changes things. The skill set that is demanded in order to take that centerpiece and execute at a very high level is very different. Folks like James Higginbotham in their APIFutures piece talked about software governance. Bill talked about API sprawl. Companies are waking up to the fact that these aren't onesies, twosies, little isolated incidents. They are waking up to the fact that they have an entire organization filled with these things. And in order to maintain the kind of flexibility and return on investment that they expect on their architectural dollars, they need to get a handle on this. They need to have some kind of mechanism for organizing this and aligning it so that it's not working at cross purposes.
I couldn't agree more. We talk to customers on a daily basis, and a lot of them don't even know how many APIs they have on hand. They just know that they do have them, and that has been piling on in the background for years. And now somebody has to deal with that mess, if you will. And now that's becoming a really hard topic, because in some of these organizations, when you talk about the number of microservices or APIs that they deal with, we're talking about tens. The largest number I heard is 10,000 microservices that run on top of REST-based APIs that power a lot of the transactions that basically you and I do over banking and phones. But these are really huge number. It's not something that happened overnight, I guess, even though a lot of people have that feeling. And I feel like a lot of people were surprised, but all of a sudden, like, APIs came to the light, if you will. They've been in the background for like the 10 past years, yet there are so many companies that have built their entire businesses, like Salesforce, like even Amazon, that they started building the first APIs in 1995s and plus. So it's always fascinating to see some of those, especially I think with the advent of and everything that's been going on with AI. Like, we've been doing a report that we called The Anatomy of an API, where we try to understand, based on 1 billion requests, what are some of these APIs doing? What are some of the common mistakes? And one of the things that we saw is, as a category, the number of AI APIs has doubled in 2023 since 2022. And I know, like, a lot of the times, most of this, there are a lot of tech trends and people tend to follow trends. But I feel like AI has been especially kind to APIs. Do you think that's going to bring more value and more light to the APIs of this world? Again, we can start with Claire and then move on.
I think there are many people out there who are, I would say, much closer to the day-to-day ramifications for AI from an API perspective. But the things that we continuously hear or get questions and so on, observations about, are not just that APIs underpin, data movement, and obviously, therefore, understanding AI and its use cases, all API driven. There's also, of course, the use of AI in developing APIs, testing them, managing. So the co-pilot, for engineering concepts, certainly one that seems to be, I think, Bill, you and others have been talking and writing about this as well. it's almost like, where do you want to push a problem? You could probably find an AI related and an AI API supported story for it. I mean, do they go hand in hand? Yes, no. But certainly, a strong understanding of both is I think what a lot of people are trying to wrestle with, as opposed to one being more or less important than another.
Interesting. What about you, Bill? I'm sure you guys have been writing a lot about the intersection of AI and API. What's your
Yeah,
take on that?
absolutely. I definitely think the technologies are complementary. And if you're going to have more AI use, you're probably going to have a lot more APIs being developed and produced and deployed as well. So I think they go hand in hand. We've seen a huge rise in large language models, generative AI startups, and a lot of this requires APIs as a conduit for productizing, integrating AI into applications. APIs are necessary for these models to collect data in real time, to refine them, and to integrate into new applications too. So that's like one aspect. I think secondly, AI could be used within the development of APIs themselves. And then thirdly, it could be used to help developers access knowledge about APIs and how to consume them in an expert fashion. And we've seen that being used with mild success and mild failures.
I think,
So
Claire talked about the
yeah.
dangers of essentially AI and the data. I think people don't quite understand maybe the amount of data that you have to share and in order to train a model, and then even share when you're asking these questions, the amount of data that goes back and forth and how sensitive the data is. And I'm sure we'll touch upon it. But I think Matthew, you've mentioned that you worked with machine learning models since, I don't know, 2015, 16. Was it also a lot heavily API based? I feel like we all knew that this was all APIs, but now people are starting to realize that, and now like AI is, I think, adding a bit more press to APIs. Is that the case, or?
Right. Yeah. So I've got some past history with this, and I've got a couple links in our private chat that hopefully support can bridge over to the regular comments, and I'll speak a little bit to it. So it's certainly much like the API story. Generative AI is not something that just happened. Although, boy, if you watch the news, it sure feels like it. It is the result of many, many, many tiny incremental steps to get to the point where we are now. To Bill's point, yes, certainly these things are very, very powerful when it comes to tightening the feedback loop in the normal developer cycle. For someone like me who, lo and behold, lives and works from home, having that feedback loop of, hey, I'm trying this, I'm getting this result, what do you think? What should I try? It tightens that feedback loop. So I'm no longer having to reach out and find a forum, find a news group, and then waiting an hour, going out for lunch, coming back. That tightened feedback loop cannot be understated. Getting an immediate set of feedback, even if it's not perhaps the best feedback, still gives me something that I can try, that I can modify, that I can tweak. And that is an incredibly powerful thing to supercharge my productivity. It is, for those that might remember the old sock monkey, it is that thing that you sit on your side of your desk, and in the process of trying to articulate your problem and what you need and what you're trying to accomplish, you're actually organizing and articulating and unlocking what you actually need to do for code. So from a productivity standpoint, these things are not going to immediately write the beautiful answer. They probably shouldn't be put directly into production, but they can cause this very virtuous feedback cycle where I'm talking through problems, I'm getting responses from somebody that never tires, is not ever going to have a bad day, and that is at least somewhat coherent. Now,
and
from
understands the language of API, so it can get any information that it needs.
And is fluent in all kinds of different languages. Now, Vedran, you talked about language in your API Futures piece. I can take something that I'm comfortable with, like Node.js, and I can say, hey, I have this Python code that looks like it's doing what I want it to, but I don't have the Python workflow. Can you bridge this? Can you translate it? And at the end of the day, underlying all of these AI models, it's just math. It's just the probability that this thing follows this thing. So Python, Node, it doesn't care. It's just taking this, looking at it, and then outputting something. So that's very exciting from an API production standpoint. Now, from a company standpoint, there's a whole host of reasons why developing their own large language model is probably not something that they're going to be doing anytime soon. From the amount of data that they require in order to train these models, to the sheer amount of compute and the expense, to the expertise, to the legal liability, all of these reasons are why many companies should be comfortable leaving that risk with somebody else and consuming the result through an API.
Exactly. I was going to say, instead of spending all that money and kind of going down that drain, all they need to do is build an API. But again, there are some caveats I'm sure we'll talk about, like a lot of governance and security aspects of it. But essentially, that's the beauty of APIs. It essentially allows you, it democratizes your own data and allows you to basically participate in this economy without throwing, I don't know, $1 million on NVIDIA graphic cards and stuff like that. So on that note, I feel like, and we've discussed this a bit, but there are still, believe it or not, people who I guess are considering participating in the API economy and want to build an API and want to understand, oh, we've got a question. So let's try to Tia Berg. How can we change the perception of APIs as a strategic asset in driving long-term businesses value versus being perceived as a tool for developers? That's what I was going to talk about. In practice, APIs are often discussed as a solution rather than a standalone product. So we can start getting into this a bit. I'll tie into this. I don't know if somebody wants to start, and then I'll tie into it.
I'm happy to lead off.
Please.
I was just about to say, Claire talks about product management. This is just teed up.
Yeah, I mean, thank you, Teo, for the question, and it's certainly one that a lot of people and organizations are wrestling with. And I'm going to give the classic consultant's answer in that it kind of depends on where you're starting from about how you choose to address that specific question. To me, in order to be able to get an answer to this question, it's about understanding how people are going to think about what APIs could mean for them. And they will mean very different things. So if you talk to technology teams, technology leadership teams, they may start from a basis of APIs are our integration strategy. But actually, if you want to get your technology teams to be thinking about APIs as business products, then you're going to be needing to educate that community on the value of starting to think about an API opportunity, collaborate with the business people much earlier, look at partnership. And again, so that's one level of education that you might have with a community of people who might just think of it as, you'd think would probably be the closest to understanding it. You might have a digital leadership team that are all about, reimagining customer journeys, who are looking to create innovative ways of working with things. They may, yes, think about APIs as, yep, we just want to get the Lego blocks exposed as APIs so that we can do stuff as quickly as possible. But actually thinking about engineers as future customers of APIs is a very different headspace for them to be in from perhaps a group of people who are very used to understanding customer behind customers' experiences. So you're going to be educating them, if you like, on a different angle. You then may have your strategic commercial people who own the corporate strategy, who understand deeply the origins of the business and how it makes money. They need to be able to understand the power of APIs. And of course, that's bringing to life all the APIs that they're in touch with on a day-to-day basis that are transparent and invisible. Matthew was talking eloquently about, Gen AI types of opportunities. You could think of when ChatGPT exploded on the market, even the experts that have been in the space for 25 years were still staggered by the pace at which it was adopted. You could argue that part of the ingredient for their success with OpenAI was they understood about open APIs, right? Their CTO, she was an API product manager, I believe, by heritage. So you've got, to me, in answer to the question, how do you provide the strategic context? It's make it real for the problem that the people you're talking to need to understand it, and it will be very different.
Right. I just, to follow on quickly on that, what Claire is talking about is a lot of digital advocacy. As long as APIs are perceived as the mechanism by which bits get moved from a bucket to another bucket, those are blinders on the tech team. That's a very anemic API product because their frame of reference is purely on achieving this as an outcome. What's required is a removal of the blinders and a greater awareness of the kind of product thinking that may not be taught to a lot of development and engineering teams. That is a different set of skills to be able to come in, recognize a consumer need, articulate the use cases, and then bring that back into the kind of interface that an API represents. So advocacy for those skill sets, advocacy for the role of product management, and advocacy for getting beyond just a single project of moving bits to a widening of the strategic opportunity. That's key here.
If I may, on top of that, like if you think about it, like people build product where there's a market for a product, and traditionally you probably want to build for a market of 30 million developers that know how to use APIs, then want to essentially can build on top of it, because that's, I think, the power of what API unlocks. And I think Claire touched upon it. The reason why the AI adoption happened so fast is precisely because everybody understood, hey, this is an API. I know how to implement it. I know how to build it on top of it. I can quickly build products and experiences around that. So I think it's actually a perfect time to basically start convincing and presenting that as a case. And that perfectly actually ties into something that Matthew is definitely going to hate, but I still want to kind of talk about is whenever I'm, even with like investors, even with corporate board members, even with day-to-day practitioners, sometimes, especially on the business side, like when we talk about the API market and the size, like we all probably quote the same thing. And I think Claire mentioned that, and we actually use that in our deck, which is a stat by Akamai in their State of the Internet report from 2021, where they said that 83% of all internet traffic belongs to API-based services. We don't know what that number, of course, is. Cloudflare, for example, has that number at 54%. A lot of developer surveys will tell you that 90% of all developers use APIs. But I wanted to kind of understand what the opportunity here was. And I've been doing some digging and trying to understand how big can this be. So I do have a number. It's a crazy number, but I'll tell you how I got to the number. And maybe we can then talk a bit about the size of this space and the amount of kind of value and not just shareholder value, but product value that APIs bring. So I've been doing some light research, if you want to call it light. Basically, for example, Amazon processed 1 trillion API requests a day in 1 day for Prime Day 2023. As you might imagine, most of those requests are actually APIs, because a lot of the products that Amazon does happens through APIs. So be it even their website, but partner APIs, purchases on other places like mobile, tablet, desktop, whatever. Facebook published a paper recently where they introduced this new serverless technology called XFast, and they claim that they can process up to 1 trillion requests a day, which probably means they're doing that. And finally, I've been looking at some kind of numbers around the OpenAI, and I don't know this. If anybody has the data, please let us know. But essentially, about 1 trillion API requests per day is something that OpenAI handles. So on top of some of that, my kind of conclusion is that when we talk about APIs, it is actually a quadrillion APIs a day, in my opinion, or even more, which is a huge amount of data that gets passed every single day. Now, if we compare that to web and something like Google, where essentially they have to index a lot of the data, this is real-time data. So a lot of this is like things that are happening at this moment in time, right? A transaction, somebody buying a book, the news, the weather. What do you actually think how big this opportunity is, and how has it been growing over the years?
Yeah, I mean, I think you answered your question yourself in a way. It's
I did,
massive.
but what do you think? Is it a crazy number?
Man, this is really hard to put an exact number to.
Yeah.
But yeah, it very well could be. I had some other reports that were slightly different. Like F5 estimates that there are nearly 200 million APIs existing today. So I don't know how often those are making calls or what the per call per day rate is for those services. But these endpoints are very pervasive. One report found that large companies with 10,000 or more employees tend to have over 250 internal APIs. So we know that large companies have a lot of these, and a lot of them are being undocumented too. Since we're going through all the figures, I have something that's kind of alarming on that note as well. Enterprise Management Associates reports that only 10% of organizations fully document their APIs, according to a 2023 report.
I can attest to that.
Yeah, and you were mentioning that earlier on the call, I think.
Exactly. I think Claire and Matthew can share a bit more there. They've worked with bigger companies as well. So
yeah, so the footprint is massive, and the inventory management is not really up to par, to kind of summarize things here.
Well, I'll take a slight issue with that, and I've certainly been in.
Yeah.
I've certainly been in environments where there is not the level of documentation hygiene that you would expect for a very critical piece of infrastructure. However, I think everybody on this panel would readily agree that not all APIs are created equal. The level of effort for a platinum level API product with the full suite of technical writing and business review and all of that is probably not the same level of effort that you might have for one of these very low level technical concerns that's simply moving a bit from here to here. And, oh, the customer happens to be myself. Every organization has limited time, energy, budget, and talent. And where do they spend that? They're going to align that with the things that make the biggest impact. And some of these APIs, yes, they're undocumented. Yes, they should be categorized somewhere. We should not orphan them. We should be able to identify them and the risk that they pose to a particular organization. But I think painting everything with a broad brush and assuming that everything needs the same level of rigor is a path toward a lot of wasted resources.
Interesting. Claire, what do you think?
That makes sense.
I agree, and I agree in the extent of also understanding what the API is used for and what risk profile it presents to the organization. If it does, which could be performance risk, could be security risk, etc., etc. I think the thing to remember in the larger the organization is, the more the more the greater the degree to which it has perhaps acquired other businesses over time, the degree to which it partners with third parties for delivering and managing a lot of its technology, the age of its estate, the use of that estate in different reasons. There are many, many reasons why. I mean, it's like these are not born. Many of them are not born tech. They're not. They've been born as businesses that use tech, and many of them are undertaking large scale change to adopt many of the practices that more, if you like, born tech companies have had in their DNA. Part of that's APIification, if you like. Part of it's, wide-scale cloud adoption. Part of it is also for the good ones, the ones that have empowered, governance, automation, and capability to support engineers being productive. Now, if a lot of that engineering capability has traditionally been partnered with, a large, complex, customized SaaS solution over many years, it is quite likely that will be. It's a little bit like, a house that hasn't, an older house that has got.
It needs some love.
It's not a new build, right? So it's, and if you want to repair some stuff and you want to add an annex, that you can find all sorts, and you might start doing one bit of repairs and then discover that actually, the plumbing's stuffed or the pipes are wrong, and then you need some specialist person who can actually repair that particular boiler that all of that happens in large scale technology world. So the technologists who look after this stuff are total heroes to my mind. And heroines. Because
I think the immense I think to your point, Vedran, the immense growth that we're seeing is not only because it's the integration tool of choice, it's a coping mechanism within companies to deal with the massive amount of complexity. If all of these companies were trying to proceed and do the business that they do with huge monoliths, there is no way comprehensively one person or even an entire two pizza team could comprehend the width and the breadth of everything that is going on. So being able to take a chunk of that, draw a circle around it, and say, okay, all of this complexity for this piece is safely behind this API, and now we're going to do this and do this, has given organizations a huge amount of run rate with their overall organizational system. Now we are to the point, and coming back to Bill's article and some of what Claire's talked about, as well as a whole host of other people for the APIFutures writing event, we're having to deal with the fact that, well, okay, we've carved out these pieces. It was an architectural design of convenience that allowed us to build more at a greater scale. But now the pieces need to be cohesive. They need to talk to each other. They need some kind of alignment back to that greater whole. And that's where we're really seeing a maturation of our practices and our processes and even our skill sets on how we approach this stuff.
I agree. And this is a perfect segue into kind of talking about some of the challenges for APIs in the future. And I think we've already kind of started this very painful kind of topic. But for me, or what we see at Treblle when we talk to customers, we've kind of grouped it into three categories. And again, please feel free to share some of the thoughts that you have here. But essentially, we see companies with three problems: no governance or standardization. I think we've talked about it. Second big problem that kind of comes back to the question that Tia had about products: no understanding of API data. So if you're building a product, the first fundamental thing is you need to understand how people are using your product. And most of this stuff is just not available to most of these teams. And the third category that we've kind of been able to kind of hone in was a low bar security. And when I say low bar, I really, really mean a extremely low bar, beyond something I've even kind of wanted to admit. So those are some of the three challenges that I see people focusing on, especially in the last 6 months, I would say, especially in these bigger organizations, as they rapidly move to these digital transformation initiatives, as they rapidly adopt these new technologies. So what do you think people should be kind of looking out for in the next couple of months or even a year or two?
I think for a baseline, making sure that there are no zombie APIs out there or shadow APIs that might be breached potentially is like a good foundational starting point. How you do that, there are many ways to go about that, and it might involve some sort of vendor. I'm not exactly sure. But just setting like baseline standards is a good idea, because so many of these security attacks against APIs, it's just like some database wrapper that's accidentally left exposed on the public web, and bots are just going through all of these endpoints automatically on a daily basis, scanning for anything that might be exposed. And people are using these sophisticated attacks. Sometimes they're not that sophisticated. Sometimes it's just like a little ID change in the URL request. And so all of this is being explored constantly at the moment. So I think just like having rigor and a zero trust mindset when we're creating these great reusable integrations is really important right now. So because like we said earlier, the security repercussions are pretty enormous from leakages and hurts the reputations. A lot of like the breaches that we're seeing in the news are API related right now, and it doesn't show any real signs of stopping.
And it actually, that has the stuff that gets shown in the news actually has a big impact. I've heard multiple people like, why would we even bother when there's such high risk of us getting exposed or hacked? So which again, I think is a very narrow mindset, like Matthew says. But please, Claire, Matthew, what do you think about some of the challenges that most people should look out for in this year?
I think there's a human factor to be very aware and alert to. The research is pretty unequivocal that, particularly, call it sort of middle and senior manager or management layers in organizations, from team leaders through to executives, are dealing with considerable stress, more so than people thought that post-pandemic things would ease off. And the research is that's not the case. In fact, people are under more pressure, that's pressure in the workplace. So it's coming out in things like, managing costs. So, hey, this generative AI stuff has been around long enough. We should be starting to realize some productivity saves out of that. Or we should be, we've been investing for many years already now in simplifying our technology, or improving the way that we digitalize. Let's start seeing what that's about, at the same time as Bill mentioning security risks, technical complexity risks. So to me, it's about looking out for the people who are actually trying to make these decisions. Many of them still wrestling with hybrid work. Many of them still wrestling with, we thought it was all going to be a bit easier. So I'm on a campaign to keep it human.
Okay, fair enough.
I get it.
Yeah, if I could co-sign with what Bill said about security and what Claire said about keeping it human, I absolutely would, with a huge John Hancock of a signature there. The other thing that I want to point out is that I think looking forward, we need to get very comfortable being uncomfortable. We've had a number of shocks to how we work and how we integrate with other folks. And I'm not talking about just APIs. I'm talking about normal day-to-day activities, whether we're talking about the global pandemic or the shortfalls in inventory that followed immediately after that, or the end of zero rate interest rates, or like, we are in a period that will have repeated unexpected shocks where that 3-year plan, that 5-year plan probably needs to be thrown out the window. We need to be very comfortable being adept at improvisation and utilizing architectures like APIs that allow us the maximum amount of flexibility to rethink and redesign. If you or your company is in a holding pattern, waiting for things to get back to the way they were, you are not setting yourself up for long-term security, let alone long-term success. The folks that will be prosperous going forward are the ones that can deal with the shocks, that are resilient in how they think, and are forward and progressive looking with how they adapt and think about change in their organizations. So
nice. I guess as humans we all make mistakes, but hopefully we could sometimes use some software to basically help us detect and eliminate some of those mistakes. And I think from maybe because we're doing API tooling a lot, and I think about it probably more than I should, but I kind of feel like in order for APIs to move forward, we need to have more tooling, more ecosystem, and more understanding. Again, not on an engineering level, because again, there's plenty of tools for DevOps engineers, for engineers as well who are building these APIs. But actually, for like somebody mentioned here, for product managers, for people who are running this business, who are making decisions, they somehow need to be able to understand what is going on their API, how good that API is, what their risk is. And I feel, I mean, this is something that, again, we at Treblle try to move forward every day, and we're building a product for multiple different of these roles. But I compare that often to the state of the web a couple of years ago, when every website was super slow, and then Google came out and said, here's a set of rules, here's a set of tools on how to basically make sure that your website is at a minimum level of quality. Do you think the impact and the tooling matters a lot going forward for APIs and for the ecosystem, and even sometimes getting these budgets to do APIs, getting these initiatives passed? Do you think that has an impact?
Can I go? Yes, absolutely. So anytime you have a behavior change that you need folks to adopt within an organization, there's one, the aptitude, whether they're able to perform the thing. So that's the skills and just the knowledge, the education of how to do the thing. There's the motivation, which most people are highly motivated. We like to talk about bad actors in our system, but for the most part, people are good and they want to be part of something big and transformational. They want to lean in. The last thing is the environment. What are the incentives of the environmental structure? And tools are a huge part of the environment. That IDE has the word environment in it. The things that tool is prompting you to do, the behaviors that tool encourages, are all things that, with the right focus, with the right amount of energy and investment, can encourage people to do the right thing in the responsible moment, as opposed to many conventional governance attempts, which put a big blocking gate at the very end after the work has already been done, where there's a tendency for surprises, for hurt feelings, for a very antagonistic relationship between the people trying to do the right thing and the people that are just trying to do their job. So, a huge opportunity for tooling in the responsible moment to help encourage better outcomes.
Yeah, I would ping pong on that by adding that I think open standards are excellent for the community to rely upon as a foundational layer for these tools. I've noticed a lot of consolidation around open API specification, and it seems like for greenfield APIs, that seems just there's no question about it. Yeah, we're using open API because they understand the benefits, they see the interoperability advantages, and it's sort of just like a understood best practice now. Same could be said for the security side of things and identity management side of things with like OAuth, OpenID Connect. These are becoming more standardized within the API space as well. There's so much else to talk to around like the whole productization aspect of all this that I find really interesting. And I think Matthew made some awesome points earlier about like the reusability advantages of it and outsourcing expertise that has been created through these microservices to other teams. I think the leaders who understand that and they're going to be more future-proofed, and the ones that really understand why API operations are necessary to attain these long-term business goals, but to stay agile in the moment. I think those are the companies or organizations that will be successful into the future. Just wanted to get that into because
and I think
sparked something.
I'd echo the theme there, Bill, around the really getting that API as a product mindset embedded, so that you're really thinking about the consumer needs, the roadmap for that, productized API in terms of how it's going to be useful, but it's actually managed and funded and resourced as a long-running tech asset in the same way that you might think about other key components of your tech landscape. I think is the organizations that really get that are certainly, it gives them an edge, but it has, for organizations that have traditionally, understood call it a project mindset and approach to how they get stuff done. To Matthew's point about, governance at sort of, bottlenecked activities along the way. All of this is still quite significant change. I think a lot of people have bought into the rationale as to why it's important. The challenge now is how to do it, and that's tooling and that's skills and that's capabilities, and it's rethinking of body relationships and all sorts of
things. Definitely, like you said, tooling for me I have a passion for it. A lot of the tooling today, and I don't mean to single out anybody, but it's all built for people who are just running these APIs, not kind of, making decisions around them. But I think education is also a pretty big topic, given that REST isn't a standard and people can just kind of willy-nilly create their own standards and come up with ideas on the fly and how to create a basic API is something that I think we will need more and more. But I think we've touched upon a couple of different things. So let's say I have an API, I build it, I create a product out of it. How do I get API adoption and how do I get people to adopt my API? Do you think oftentimes there are two camps, like you really need good documentation or you build your own SDKs? What do you think from your experience? Where do you guys lean on more?
Well, I would point out that SDKs and good documentation are not mutually exclusive.
I know. I'm just asking. Sometimes people are like either or, but if you have the budget for one,
well, it goes back to the audience and the sophistication and understanding the use cases that they're going to partake in. If you have an audience that's going to integrate with your API that perhaps is not very savvy about OAuth and the respective flows, and you can abstract that away under an SDK and tell them, listen, just put that in your code. That's a very important signal that your product manager should be glomming onto and utilizing in your decision making. If you are entering a very mature space where there's a necessity for the kind of granular control on the APIs, well, maybe the SDK is a very difficult thing to do and support all the different languages. Those are different languages that really depend a lot on the context.
Okay, interesting.
I agree they're not mutually exclusive, but I'm going to add a even more clickbaity response here. I think both are becoming irrelevant in the wake of AI.
Okay.
Like, yes, you should have an open API specification. Yes, you should have docs, but how developers are actually going to like generate their glue code and get something together that integrates with an API in their application, I think that's going to become more and more like AI generated into the future and embedded into their workflows or integrated developer environments. So I don't know. I would say whatever streamlines developer experience will win out in the future.
I think we do automatically generated docs, and we also added an AI assistant that can generate code based on that documentation, right? So we would generate the open API spec. Our AI assistant can actually read and understand that API spec ad hoc and can generate any integration code in any language. We've seen that, like you said, it has very, very powerful effects in at least boilerplating that integration, because I think something that I personally noticed as somebody who's an engineer, like people spend a lot of time doing documentation and creating these beautiful pages. At the end of the day, most people don't read like 90% of that. They just want to understand how do they make this API request as fast as humanly possible. And I think you're right here. If AI can, if you land on a docs page and can quickly just say, hey, I just want to create an article on this API, can you just tell me how do I do that? I think that is very powerful. And I actually think that that's a very positive thing from an API, from an AI perspective, that can be utilized on APIs. And I do also agree that it's not mutually exclusive, but it is, it is something that it is a question that we hear. Now, going forward, what do you think some of the best practices and trends for 2024 and onwards should be for a successful company? Is it pushing more APIs, pushing going more to cloud, going transformation or something like that? What do you think should people be focusing on this year in the light of AI, in the light of democratizing data, in the light of more data exchange? What do you think that is?
Well, I think that budgets are under pressure, and so a lot of it is about what I would call sweating the small stuff. So it's about doing more and getting more out of either the same or doing the same with less. So I think there's that, and that's about being working smarter, not harder, and all of those sorts of things. I think that's has happened in previous cycles of that kind of a change. It actually does also unleash creativity in sometimes some quite unlikely places, which is goodness. So I think people are expecting to now get returns from some of the investments in people and capabilities and environment and tooling and so on, frameworks that they have been putting pressure on. So I think they're wanting to see that. And in terms of an API space, it's about following whatever the strategy is. At the end of the day, if the business strategy is partnering in new territories, then the pressure on having API products that are going to be really resilient to support third-party integration is going to be quite different than if it's about hunkering down and consolidating on maybe improving productivity and digitalization around some existing customer experiences. That's going to be more maybe focus on API, performance management and scaling and those sorts of things. So as with every technology, if it doesn't have a sensible commercial and business rationale behind it, then why are you doing it? Unless it's in the space where your API product opportunities are best brought to life by the people that deeply understand the data opportunity that can be unlocked. And in our experience, that isn't usually individuals. It's actually a collective activity with people who understand, back-end systems and maybe overlooked opportunities that have been dormant, together with people who understand how to kind of package those up, market price, position them in ways that can allow them to be creative. But to create that environment for people, that kind of hothouse collaboration model is one of the things that I think people need to put more time in, with that backdrop of everybody stressed and has had more than enough time on hybrid workshops anyway. So balancing that is I think a key challenge for people.
It's hard asking people to do more right now.
Yeah.
So it's actually about doing, giving them space to do that creative thinking in the right group formats that will bring out the best. That's something that we find when people are given permission to take that bit of a pause, the step back, the think. Yeah, and actually, hang on a sec. Maybe we could rethink this quite differently, and we could get some really, really rich opportunities out of it. But and where that works, that's where the magic happens in terms of API opportunities coming to life in our experience. But allowing people that space and time, and it's not as a Jira ticket.
Create an API, yeah.
This is business strategic thinking and technical excellence.
I agree. Bill, what do you think? Should businesses invest more in APIs this year?
I think they'll have to,
They are
for many of the reasons we've already discussed. I've been seeing open source is kind of in a midlife crisis right now. I've noticed a lot of these packages are not really, I don't know, it's just a weird time. And I hope that the foundations, like the standards, the open source packages that people are utilizing quite a bit every day in the API world will remain stable going forward. So I would encourage businesses to participate in that regard and continue those investments, because I do think it's important. But if we're talking about what to focus on within a company, I think we've all been discussing governance and its importance. I think to take that a step further, ensuring that we aren't asking too much, that governance isn't really presenting a bottleneck for development, that it's more fluid and automated when possible, so we're not requiring additional steps and holding back innovation. We've already talked a lot about security threats. I think outside of that, navigating different design styles will be interesting going into the future. I think the last Postman report from 2023 saw GraphQL finally usurping SOAP as one of the most popular design styles for APIs out there. So definitely a lot of momentum around GraphQL and its relationships with APIs is interesting. But we need to keep old tech running, right? And avoid breaking change. So just making sure things are maintainable for the long run will be and scalable will be the tricky thing here.
I agree. Matthew, what do you think API wise this year? Spend time, don't spend time, spend a lot of time, spend all your time.
I think security. You would not own a house if you did not know where the doors and locks were. But yet a lot of companies have unaccounted for ingress and egress in their organizations. This doesn't have to be complicated. Start with a spreadsheet and start listing what you know about, and start asking people if that list is current or if there is other things that need to be in there. After that basic step, if you don't have that clear accounting, that catalog of ingress egress inside your organization, start one. If you got one, start building out that risk profile. Which of these things is potentially a news report waiting to happen, and which one of these things do we need to rein in or have a conversation about? Which one of these things is orphaned and therefore represents a risk? Start building that risk portfolio. You don't have to go full big G governance and go out and hire a full COE to deal with this stuff. There's very sound, easy, incremental first steps that you can do. But security is certainly a big one. Other than that, there's lots of great things that were published to the API Futures that I think certainly could be a topic of conversation. One of my favorites is the API workflows. We all talk about APIs and REST-ish APIs as being stateless. The truth of the matter is there's actually subsequent steps that need to be called. And in order to unlock some of this AI integration, we need to understand call A to call B to call C, and we need to define that in a tech parsable way. So the open API web flows work stream, I think, is something to watch with interest.
I agree. I agree there, and I'll be more direct than maybe some of you, but just speaking from personal experience here in Treblle, and we've been building built some stuff as like non-API, meaning we built it as maybe a monolith and then ran it there. But the reason why we were able to execute on some of these ideas, and the reason why we've been able to push our products much faster in the last 6 months, has actually been because we internally also switched to API first, right? So when we wanted to do a native Mac app, we already had the API. When we want to do the Windows app, we already have the API. It's a UI thing. It's no longer a technology backend thing. It's no longer a strategic thing. We already have the product. So either we choose to build on top of our own API or we let others build. That's a question of whether control, right? Do I want to let go of some of that control all at once, or do I want to keep it for myself for some time? But especially, like, I've never thought about CLI as an interface, for example, but you could easily go from a website to a native app to a CLI to a watch app to a Vision Pro app. Everything that all the UIs that are coming in the future share one thing in common, and that's an API. And I think fundamentally understanding what Claire kind of and what we all talked about, understanding the data around that, because if you think about websites, right, right now there are so many ways that you can understand product usage data on a website, from heat maps to recordings of people clicking around your website to doing all of that. For APIs, we're still, I would say, in early stages of that, and only when we unlock and understand the data that goes and flows through our API will it be important. And my prediction is the data will get more complex, and to Matthew's point, the flows will become more complex. So you're going to hop off from microservice A to microservice B to microservice C and get that all in one API call. So that's something that top of mind for me. I know we've been talking for an hour and 15 minutes, but if we can wrap it up, if any of you have anything that you want to talk about, please feel free to ask a question or start a topic. Or if there are any more comments, please feel free to let us know. I think most of the team would be more than happy to answer all your questions. Anybody got anything?
Well, I'd end by encouraging folks to check out the APIFutures hub page. It has links to more than 30 posts published by the folks that were involved in the event. I also want to thank the people that dedicated their time and energy to making the event what it was. I really was excited to log into LinkedIn and see all of the hashtag APIFutures posts. It warmed my heart, and usually logging into LinkedIn doesn't do that for me. So it was a fantastic event. There's a wealth of stuff in there, and I would encourage the audience to go and just explore. Set aside an hour or two to just explore and find your next favorite API person. Hopefully, if the staff can post the link in the chat, that would probably be great.
Claire, any closing thoughts?
No, but thank you to you and all of the team for giving us this opportunity for sharing some musings and ideas, like the work that Matthew got us all to rallied us all round for a January activity, which was great. These opportunities to bounce ideas off others that are thinking deeply about this stuff is always a privilege. So thank you very much.
Bill, last words from you, at least on this stream.
Yeah. I just first off, Matthew, thank you so much for the APIFutures initiative. It was really great to see the community unified like that, and I think it does amplify the voice and the mission around thinking API first, and hopefully bringing people into the network, because it is kind of insular. The API community, we kind of chatter one another, and I would like to bring more people into this community, or at least be aware of what the messages we're trying to impart. So I think that's really important. If you don't want to spend an hour looking through the 20 or so of those articles, Nordic APIs did do a summary of the main takeaways of each, which I could share with you all.
Nice. Thank you all. I really appreciate every one of you here and kind of talking about some of the problems, some of the issues, as well as everybody who tuned in. Let's see how it goes. Maybe we do some more of these. But generally, like to echo some of the things that Bill said, I think the only way forward as basically as an industry is basically, if we talk about it, if we bring people together, if we as a community grow, not just tooling wise but also education wise, because as we've all said, that is pretty important. And again, if you're interested in some of the stuff that we're doing, we automate a lot of the stuff that we've talked about. So governance, security, all of those checks, Treblle does that for you in a very business friendly way, and that's going to be a thing that we do going forward as well. So if anybody has any questions or anything, please feel free to reach out to Matthew, Claire, or Bill on LinkedIn. I'm sure. Go say hi in the morning tomorrow to Matthew. Apparently his LinkedIn feed isn't as positive as maybe mine, but yeah. Thank you all, and looking forward to catching you maybe on the next one pretty soon. I also love the t-shirt, Matthew RSS. I only saw it. So it's making a comeback, right? It's making a comeback, that's for sure. So
minimally viable API.
Exactly. Everything wrong with APIs is described in that picture. But it was nice chatting to you all, and bye-bye.
Thanks for having us.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.